Welcome to the Psychologically Speaking blog on Substack. I'm Leela Ainge, and this is a voiceover. I am going to attempt to read back my article, and anyone who's listened to my voiceovers will know I ad-lib a little bit, so this will not follow exactly the writing and I may go off on a tangent, but broadly you're getting what I've written. Okay, so here we go. There is a leaderboard on Substack, and you can be a rising writer in your category. And I think I knew this, but I didn't know that it applied to me until yesterday. And I was notified by Substack in the notifications. It did light up a bit of me that was stood back at school wishing to be picked. And when I told my husband, I think it's useful to know he's not on Substack, his reaction was really grounding because he's like, well, what does that mean? And indeed, what does it mean? Well, it means so much. Psychologically, it's curious. That means a lot to me. But I think it means so much because it kind of means I've got to tell people who will get it. And this blog then is about how I do that without bragging, and what if this isn't as exciting as I think it is and my bubble is burst, and that piece of me that went, oh God, I'm going to have to hype myself. So Substack sells itself as a space for sincerity, and we write what matters to us, we share our voice. But in the back end, there is this ranking system and it's a popularity chart. You know, it reminds us that visibility still runs on metrics. And that isn't a complaint. You know, I study the psychology of identity and imposter experiences. And what I found is that for most of us, and especially folk with marginalised identities, it's not just that fear of failure, it's the fear of being seen in the wrong way. So too much, too soon, the wrong crowd. And the tension there, that's what I call the visibility trap in my imposter phenomenon research. So it's not about insecurity or a lack of confidence. It's not a syndrome that you or me have got. It's very much fueled by something that we call context collapse. Now, if you want to know more about that, episode 2, season 1 of the Psychologically Speaking podcast covers context collapse for the whole episode. But you can also understand it in terms of the psychologists who coined the phrase. So this is Marek and Boyd, and in 2011 they were describing that when we are in spaces where there are multiple potential audiences, this is what happens. It's a modern phenomenon on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook and Substack that you can be side by side with your old manager, your next door neighbour, a famous person, a stranger on the internet, you know. And when you're sharing your voice, you know that they're out there, right? But you don't know which version of you they're seeing. And perhaps for lots of us, that identity expression is all about picking and selecting and presenting different versions of ourselves through different parts of our life. And that's not a performance. It's a very natural thing for us all to do. So what happens then with context collapse is we start presenting or writing, if you're a writer, to a crowd, a blurry crowd, instead of an individual person. And that's the exhaustion then that you often feel, or it gets mislabeled as overthinking and becomes one of those imposter experiences. I'm fascinated by all of this, clearly. And there was a very recent study published just this month, actually, and it talks about switching between identities, and it gives us a little bit of nuance to break that down. So if we look at this in my context, it says the study would suggest that because I'm a writer, a parent, a feminist, a scientist, a psychologist, project manager, researcher, the cost to me isn't cognitive. So yeah, you've heard that right. It's not that I have this big mental load. And I tend to think of myself as being the poster girl for mental load. You know, I'm constantly shifting and moving between all my different projects. their study shows that that load or that strain isn't cognitive, it's an emotional one. And it's a psychological lag though. And this is such a nuance, it's such a different way of thinking about the problem, because it's shown that there's a lag between who we are and how we then show up in that identity. And especially how that might work with an imagined audience, like you, for example. You might be here to clap at my writing and praise, or you might be here going, who does she think she is? You know, hopefully you're not there doing that. If you are, I'm not judging you. But context collapse is about imagined audiences, and we have this idea of imposter phenomenon that sits side by side with it. So now we've got this idea of almost jet lag for the brain. Brilliant, right? So I described this on a note this week in Substack as the lag time we need to get ourselves ready. And as a writer, you'd experience that as a use of maybe a writing ritual, lighting a candle, sitting at your favourite desk, picking up your favourite pen, or, you know, getting into a quiet zone or going to your favourite library or coffee shop. And the idea that that isn't about performing somebody who we aspire to be, but about us preparing to be the person we are. So it's a positioning thing. And think of it as this. If you're struggling with that idea of, but I have to put myself in a place where I believe I'm a writer, it's a bit like stretching before a race when you're a runner. You don't do the stretch to get you down the track, because you already are a runner, you already know how to run and put one foot in front of the other, hopefully. And that performance, the stretch is part of it. Stretch is that transitionary period, and we see that with sports people loads. I think that research landing earlier this week then has helped me to think about then how I've reacted to the news that I've been placed in a leaderboard somewhere. But I also want to look at this through the frame of something completely different, which is the Cannes Film Festival. And I don't know a huge amount about the Cannes Film Festival, but I do love fashion, and I love the idea of red carpets and all of the psychology of the glam and showing up and visibility, and, you know, there's so much feminist stuff in there. So let's go there. So the Cannes Film Festival has this red carpet, and from what I can tell, it is the most glamorous version of visibility with the biggest oxymoron ever, because actually the point of it isn't to pose and to stop and be stared at and photographed and for it to be a slow, pleasurable thing. It's turned into something where it's not actually about the person walking the red carpet. Perhaps that limelight's for the organisers, and it's about control. So the red carpet, I didn't realise until I looked it up earlier this morning, traces back to ancient Greece. And so the origin story is intriguing and curious, because I think it lends itself to how we think of self-promotion and visibility today. The red carpet features in this Greek play with a hero by the same name. So it's called Agamemnon, and hopefully someone will correct me if I've got that pronunciation absolutely incorrect. But I'm led to believe it means resolute or steadfast. So this hero is a resolute and steadfast man, and he makes some questionable decisions, I think. The carpet in the play is actually a rich tapestry, and isn't that an interesting metaphor? But it's a crimson tapestry, but it's laid out by his wife. And he returns from the Trojan War. She's laying out this crimson red carpet for him as a symbol of his status. But the play apparently is laying this out as impending doom as well. So according to various internet sources, because, you know, I've not read it, I've only just found out about it this morning, he hesitates because he's aware it will look a bit like excessive pride. But he walks that carpet anyway. And I'm not going to add what happens next, because you may want to add that, a bit like me, to your to be read pile. It's certainly going on mine. But the point of this Greek play in this essay is that the desire and reluctance to be seen and celebrated and ranked and rewarded is not just a modern phenomenon. And just like Agamemnon, some of us still are hesitant about stepping out onto the red carpets that are laid before us. And I thought that's a little bit about what's going on for me right now. It's built entirely for visibility, the red carpet, but the Cannes red carpet now comes with rules. And those rules are about how not to be visible. That's the oxymoron. So this year, and presumably because of recent events and decency reasons, the organisers then issued a dress code to people who had these golden tickets. I think there's a ranking system where certain tickets allow you to walk the red carpet. And it said no nudity, which seems obvious. No big gowns with massive trails, and no disrupting the flow of guests. So this rule then doesn't feel like it's an etiquette thing, but sounds more like control, doesn't it? It's control of the performance and the whole thing and the orchestrating. And you have to then start to think about, why are women wearing invisible clothes on a very visible carpet? On the surface, it looks like it could be feminist agency, a sheer dress is a real statement piece. But if we step back, it is a lot murkier than that. Bianca Sensori, she was the person who wore that see-through outfit on a red carpet recently, and she didn't speak, she stood still, and that moment was awkward and global and viral because we didn't just read it as fashion, we read it as a woman on mute and as a woman to look at, but perhaps with some curiosity and trepidation. We were left wondering, I think, as an audience there, is that somebody in control or under control? So, psychologically speaking, there's objectification theory, and this fits really well and sits side by side with a lot of the performance and appearance and visibility in online spaces. Women, especially those under the public gaze, are often taught to see themselves through imagined selves, and you learn to manage your visibility probably before you've had a chance to shape your voice. I look at how young children in my family pose for photos now. It's a very instamatic kind of culture that we're in. So the result is that we all end up, I think, trying to be visible just enough to be relevant, enough not to be ridiculed. And it's that kind of tension, isn't it, that is really curious. Now, for my friend who's always encouraged my writing, I've popped in some art today, and Jenny Holzer is the person who has created artworks based on the idea of truisms, and you can look up her work, but there's one piece that I want to draw on today, which is called Protect Me From What I Want. So Jenny's work is plastered in big neon bright limelight onto billboards and buildings and in galleries. And so if you can imagine coming across that phrase of saying, protect me from what I want, she's suggesting that this is, a stance on how we expose or think about control sitting in plain sight. She's thinking about that visibility economy. And for me, it felt like it sat alongside that idea of the whisper from inside algorithms. It's like, do you want this? Do you need saving from what you want? Is this really what you want? What are the downsides? What's the risk? I think it aligns quite neatly with her idea that she looks at those subjects which are around us wanting safety and control and privacy, but we also want to be visible. So she's all about contradiction, and she's putting this piece up there in bright light so that you see it, and that same push and pull is in our online lives. So platforms like Substack, LinkedIn, Instagram, they're all inviting us to show up. but they set the terms, don't they? And we bring our voice. They're the ones that are deciding what success looks like, how the growth works, and how visibility gets rewarded. So you start to notice it more, and then that language, topping category, most shared, rising writer. When I saw rising writer, and it was 60, and I'm not talking about being in the top 3 of anything here, but yesterday it felt really personal. You know, that thing is built into the system to hit me personally. I wasn't necessarily craving that attention because I didn't know it existed until yesterday. But the notification and the structure of it is now designed to keep me hoping for it, right? And why not? Because when that system says, yeah, you take that position 60, it stirs something a bit deeper than ego. So what happened yesterday, I wasn't quietly thrilled, and I'm not going to be all demure and say, oh yeah, well, that was nice. I was really chuffed, and I was loudly chuffed. And the way that I reacted was to turn to my husband and go, look at this. And he tried and failed to understand what being placed at 60 in a rising list is and whether that's good or bad. He couldn't tell from my facial expression anyway. But of course it meant something to me. It was really personal to me. It's a signal, and for me I've taken it as a signal that maybe my writing isn't going into a void. You know, it's just that perhaps I do belong here. And isn't that what we all want? The social psychologist in me would say yes, that's what we all want. I know that on balance, and I'm a pragmatic person, there are dozens of these categories, you know, so think modern day school races where everyone gets a medal, you know. There's enough of them so that enough of us can feel like we've found our lane, and even if we don't win the race, that's the great bit, that's the clever part of this illusion of access, isn't it? This illusion of maybe equity, that it's spread big enough for everybody. But it reminded me of another moment that has also mattered to me. And this one is one that gets judged differently by different people. So when my podcast was shortlisted for an International Women's Podcast Award last year, I'd put myself forward, and that's how you do it. Most industry awards, you nominate yourself. And it was judged externally, so the shortlist is the bit that I was proud of because I made the shortlist. That wasn't by chance, you know, and by it wasn't by just putting myself forward. It was because actually what I had done had resonated with a group of people I didn't know. And that line in the shortlist email I've got saved, and it still makes me smile. And I use the phrase award nominated liberally. And to some, that nomination is me playing the game or me paying to play the game, you know. And some people would question, should we do that? But my view is, why not? And that's the imposter phenomenon tension, isn't it? Because we show up and perhaps we're told, don't be too much, or we try not to be too much, and try not to vanish and hide behind a rock when it does feel too much. Yet when something sticks, you start to wonder, well, was that luck, merit? Is it just good optics? And we hesitate. So just like Agamemnon on his rich tapestry in front of him, hesitating before moving forward and enjoying it, you know, we want somebody to perhaps protect us from what we want. Because God forbid if we brag or we get it wrong, or we talk a lot about visibility in spaces like this, and I don't think we just want to be seen. I think what we really want to be recognised for is what we meant to say, which is where the loss of control and context collapse is psychologically so rich and important. However, every now and then, the system you or I want to be in and occasionally saved from or protected from blinks and says yes. You know by now that I like to team up my writing with something quite practical. So what does this mean? Well, visibility is rarely neutral. It's shaped by our very unequal systems. and it's a part of the platforms, the dress codes and algorithms, and even compliments that we are surrounded by. So when we're told it's our choice, we forget to question, who's built this place that we're being put in, who's created this pedestal or this platform or this plinth or this ladder that we're trying to climb. And that lighting might be a little bit harsh, but here's how I'm sitting with it today. So if you're feeling uneasy with being visible, it might not be you. It might be the structure, and that isn't imposter phenomenon, and it's definitely not syndrome. And what if you could, or I could, write differently if we picture one kind of reader instead of a row of those judges? And we need to choose our metrics, don't we? Because yes, Substack has those leaderboards, and I want to just put this into context. Yesterday, three wonderful things happened yesterday. The first was I had some feedback this week, and it says Leela asks killer questions, and it is just like the perfect bit of feedback and the greatest soundbite I could ever hope for, and I love it, and I'm going to turn that into something on my website as a testimonial. And then the next thing that happened was a good friend of mine had WhatsApped me and said thank you for giving them a bit of a nudge, and that just warmed me up. And that's the kind of thing I live for. I love close connections, and I love having conversations with people and knowing that I have supported them and lifted them up. And then this happened, and all three of those things are equally important to me, and I'm not layering one as more important than the other. So my question to you would be, are there any quiet or quieter things in your inboxes or your WhatsApps that you're maybe not counting that you could be counting? And as a footnote, really, if it helps, yes, I feel really weird celebrating small wins. But I did not want to let this one pass by. If this is my red carpet, I want you to know that I've got a flashlight and I'm shining it on that Substack orange hashtag that says 60 rising in science. I'm dead proud of that. I love being a scientist. What I would say is just don't expect me to tell you when I'm no longer there. Let's just sit in this moment. Thanks for listening today.